Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing the question of what's going on with the rule of law in Thailand. And I'm not stating this euphemistically. I'm not trying to be sensationalistic with this, but I have a serious concern, just as a lawyer and frankly as a Thai, exactly what is going on. And there's been some things the last few weeks that I found deeply concerning and pertains to kind of, it's sort of generally in the orbit of the response to COVID-19. As we've discussed in other videos on this channel, we've discussed the so-called mask mandate. I find that to be a little disconcerting, especially the notion you have to wear one. And this is on a personal level. I don't like to inject personal opinion completely. I prefer to do the legal analysis and just kind of look at things. But I guess you could say this is an opinion piece. So I will put, my cards on the table as sort of what I think, which is, I find it concerning, especially the notion you have to wear something from the moment you leave your home, especially outdoors. That seems to me to be a little bit over the top. However, recently, it seems that we're just, the slippery slope argument, if you will, we may already be on that slope. Let's just put it that way. A recent article from the Pattaya News, that's the PattayaNews.com, article is titled Thais and Foreigners in Phuket. Now, clearly they're saying Phuket, not Pattaya, even though it's from the Pattaya News. Thais and foreigners in Phuket caught not wearing masks, punished by exercising instead of fines. And I just found this pretty concerning. So, quoting directly from this article, the measurement checkpoints, so they've set up these checkpoints to make these determinations. The measurement checkpoint's main focus was on 100% of wearing face masks properly, so not just wearing a mask, but then they determine what is proper, including over the nose and not around one's chin in public, according to checkpoint officers. The vast majority of foreigners and Thais were found wearing masks correctly. However, there were more than 10 people, both foreigners and Thais, who were found not wearing face masks either at all or properly. They had all been warned and punished by doing some exercise as a, quote, first soft warning, unquote. Their names and identification were also recorded, however, in case they are caught violating again, in which case authorities would resort to fines. The Pattaya News notes that authorities have the ability to use their discretion on punishment, and if they choose to give soft warnings over fines for the first-time offenders. Well, I would challenge that statement. Authorities have the ability to use their discretion. We have discussed where they've cited, and I have two videos up that have gone into relatively substantial detail on this, where they've cited Section 51 of the Act, the Communicable Diseases Act, which then goes over to Section 36. And the subsection which we note, I believe it's subsection 4, the main one that it looks like they're hanging their hat on for this is, to me, first of all, it notes that they can prohibit things which could be deemed unhygienic, for lack of a better term. They don't actually mandate anything. It doesn't state that they can compel anyone. At least that's the version we've looked at, and I've discussed it with legal professionals. That's the way it looks to me. Again, interpretation, I'm not going to get into all of that. But long story short, at least the plain language of the statute would seem to suggest they can prohibit things. But compelling things, I don't know where they deem that. Also, the specific act says fines. It doesn't say anything other than fines. It says fines. It specifically says a fine of 20,000 baht. Okay, that is what it is, and setting that aside for a moment, it doesn't say that they can make people do exercises. I find this really concerning that this is out there, and this is just kind of how it's being done, and then the media just comes out and says the Pattaya News notes the authorities have the ability to use their discretion on punishment, and if they choose to give soft warnings over fines for the first-time offender. Well, warnings, okay, that makes sense, but to make people do exercises, and also from the plain language of this, if you are deemed, okay, not just not wearing a mask, let's set aside not wearing one, but okay, you're wearing a mask and it's deemed to be improper, they can say drop and give me 20. I just, again, that's that seems pretty concerning from a rule of law standpoint. Also, quoting directly from the Phuket News, that's the PhuketNews.com, article is titled, Thai's Foreigners Arrested for Drinking at Patong Beach. Quoting directly, Vice Governor Vikram explained that the provincial government had set the number of people allowed to sit together drinking alcohol to just 2. Phuket City Police Chief Colonel Thirawat Liamsuang said that the Phuket Provincial Police had emphasized that all police officers on the island are to strictly enforce anti-COVID measures to help reduce the number of infections in Phuket. It's not so much the enforcement. That seems to, it seems to logically flow from this. But more to the point is, again, quoting directly, Vice Governor Vikram explained that the provincial government had set the number of people allowed to sit together drinking alcohol to just 2. It just seems, well, scary that the government is dictating how many people can sit and drink alcohol. It's getting to, there's a notion, and you can't apply foreign legal concepts onto a different jurisdiction, but I'm talking about this conceptually just from a commonsensical standpoint. There's a notion in American law, at least, and I do understand them in Thailand, but just let's view this as an exercise in comparative law. There's a notion of if something is deemed arbitrary and capricious, that it is presumptively invalid. That if a government regulation, for example, is deemed arbitrary and capricious, it's presumptively invalid. Well, I'm not saying that concept necessarily applies here, but it is, I think, useful from a commonsensical standpoint to step back from this and my big question here is it really a good idea to have law enforcement making calls on the street level as to whether or not people are wearing their masks properly and then allowing them to compel people to do exercises on the street? Yeah, we've got the photos in the article. Again, I'm not going to put them up. I would urge folks to go check out that article. Again, it's the PadiaNews.com. Article is titled, Thais and Foreigners in Phuket Caught Not Wearing Face Masks, Punished by Exercising Instead of Fines. And there's a video on there too. It just seems, I think I would question whether those resources are being put to good use. And I also just think it seems a little draconian to set up checkpoints and then try to make determinations about wearing masks properly and then kind of compel people to go through the motions of these exercises. It's unsettling to me on a personal level. And then at the same time, now you've got provincial authorities dictating how many people can sit and have a drink, just sort of out presumably in the open air, it would seem to be from that article. Again, that article is Thais Foreigners Arrested for Drinking at Patong Beach. That's the Phuket News, PhuketNews.com. Again, the only reason I'm bringing this up is the rule of law exists in any country. And in Thailand, frankly, I have a great deal of respect for Thai law. One of the notions in the civil law, which is somewhat different than the common law, but one of the notions in the civil law is the notion of codification. And I'm talking about this as a relative outside observer because I'm a trained common law attorney, but I've done a lot of comparative law over the years, and I've done a lot of research on Thai law, just being around Thai law in a law firm here. And one of this notion of codification is very different than the common law because the common law takes the law and then interprets it and then creates a body of the interpretive text, if you will, and that's jurisprudence. That's basically, the body of law as it exists, sort of as it is alive. It's like living law is the interpretation. In the civil law system, codification is more the primary means of expounding on the law as it sits. And by codification, what are we talking about? Well, the specific outlining in the text, the plain language of statutes, what is deemed illegal conduct in the case of criminal law, what is deemed illegal conduct even in a civil sort of setting. And these two things are, again, it's codification. It's not done through the interpretive process, the way that common law jurisdictions do it through opinions over time. The thinking is it's better if it's just codified so that everybody knows what's legal and what's illegal. Society is on notice of what they can and cannot do. Now, as a practical matter, it might be difficult to be on notice of every little thing out there, but the principle is sound. This notion of codification, that things need to be codified so that people are at least on constructive notice of what is legal and what is illegal. As I've noted in other videos, the statutory language on which a lot of these restrictions and provincial orders are based, it seems to be based on an interpretation that, in my opinion, is, for me, it was quite a stretch under the best of circumstances for me to see the logic behind the interpretation, but okay, different people have different opinions. Now we're getting to the point where even on top, we've sort of accreted to on top of that. So the mask mandate, for example, accreted on top of that is now this notion that people on the street can determine whether or not people are wearing masks properly and then compel them to do exercises in punishment for not wearing masks properly. That seems to be a bit of a stretch based on the plain language, at least of the Communicable Diseases Act that we've discussed on this channel before. Now, again, how this is all going to play out, I don't know. Is this just kind of a one-off? Hopefully, are maybe people a little bit overly excited, maybe a little bit, I hesitate to use the word hysterical, but maybe people are getting a little too overwrought about this, government included, folks in government included. I think perhaps that might be the case, and maybe we all should just take a big, deep breath and sort of step back and say, hey, what's the purpose? What's the policy behind, for example, the mask mandate? And as we've discussed in other videos, the WHO themselves has said, people who are outside and they're not around anybody, they don't really need to be wearing, well, I shouldn't say they don't really need to be wearing masks, but WHO has said, or at least by omission, they've made it clear, and we've cited this in another video, that unless it's like gatherings of people or transportation or something like this, or a large concert, for example, or something, places where there's a lot of people outdoors milling around together, that, a mask mandate outside is not a major priority. And yet here we are seeing people getting detained at checkpoints and made to do exercises for presumably not only not wearing masks, but not properly wearing masks. So again, I just think all of this, I kind of wish everybody, especially at a policy level, would just take a deep breath and kind of rethink what's the spirit behind what we're trying to do here. Because just stopping people and making them do exercise, it doesn't seem like seems like a waste of a lot of people's time, including the resources of law enforcement here. And I do still believe everybody's acting in good faith. They're trying to do what they think is best. But sometimes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we can end up with a bad set of circumstances, even where people are trying to do what they think is right.